horror. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention that we're recording this meeting and it's available on the internet. Sorry about that. So in the last month, we've watched in horror the Israeli storming and attacks on worshippers on the Al-Aqsa Mosque during the holy month of Ramadan, whilst the world turns a blind eye. We watched in horror the forced confession of 14-year-old Ahmed Mansara, whilst the world turns a blind eye. We watched in horror the escalation of attacks on Palestinians, including on Gaza, whilst the world has turned a blind eye. Today, we've been joined by activists, both here in the UK and also from Palestine, and they will brief us on the developments in what's happening in Palestine. The people that are joining us today are we have Musharraf Farah from Sheffield, PSC, a Palestinian, who's going to update us on the situation in Gaza. Odeh Zakaria, who's speaking from Jerusalem and is involved in the Sheikh Jarrah campaign. We also have with us Dr. Ahmed from the Muslim Association of Britain to speak to us about the Arabic Accords, and also Kamil Hawaj, chair of PSC, to brief us on the recent developments in Palestine. Following the speakers, we'll have a Q&A, and then we'll have an announcement about the demonstration in London next week. So first off, I'd like to introduce Musharraf Farah from Sheffield.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you so much, and I'm really pleased and honored to be with you today. Although I'm supposed to be speaking, or I will be speaking on Gaza, but I just want to point out and emphasize what you just mentioned, Nusrat. It's about the issue that Gaza isn't the issue or the only issue of the Palestinians, because there is a lot of emphasis these days on the Gaza Strip and what's happening there, and there should be this emphasis. But I just want to point out that the issue is bigger than that, and the issue, as you said, is the Palestinian Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians that is still ongoing, as we will hear, of course, from Zakaria and others in Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah, Salwan, and also inside Palestine pre-1948, for instance, Al-Araqib village, which has been destroyed 199 times so far, 7 kilometers north of Be'er Saba. So the issue isn't Gaza, and we must remember that. We must not be fooled into moving our ambitions just to Gaza or Al-Aqsa Mosque for this, another example. And then when the Israelis give a little bit of concessions, the world will think that this is good, and why the Palestinians are not happy and why they're not satisfied. And that happens every time. So the issue is much bigger than that. As for Gaza, I came back from Gaza 3-4 weeks ago. And the situation of Gaza is as dire as it has been for the last 20 years or more. The siege is very tight. The evidence of poverty is everywhere, and that is the shocking part of the situation. Biggest part of the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip is below the line of poverty. Statistics say that 35% are, below $2 a day to survive on, and the rest, up to 80%, are just struggling to put food on the table. I think this is part of a plan to bring the Gaza Strip, people of the Gaza Strip, on their knees, and then as they move every attack on every area, like the West Bank, for instance, they're still attacking it. But sadly, what we saw in the West Bank is because of the politics of the World Bank and whatever, we saw very little response in other parts of the West Bank other than Jerusalem. So they are hoping that they bring Gaza off their knees, and then that is the last, if you like, biggest fuel tank for the so-called Palestinian revolution or the Palestinian revolution. So a plan that is targeted at every aspect of life in the Gaza Strip. I had the privilege of visiting the fishermen in the Gaza Strip, and the stories I heard were beyond shocking, more than shocking. And sadly, we know very little about that. I was personally shocked, and I regard myself as somebody who knows about the situation. But when you think about 4,200 fishermen and 1,500 other, if you like, establishment dependent on the fishermen, and it's nearly completely destroyed. When you think that over the last week, for instance, 6 boats, rusty boats, we're talking about rusty boats, ailing, failing, dying boats which has engines that are hardly working, fishermen who are known to the Israelis by name, and the boats, and yet the attacks are every day, almost every week. And just for your knowledge, 360 attacks on fishermen were carried out by the Israeli Naval Force last year. And not a single evidence, one single evidence of any fisherman or any boat causing any danger to the Israeli Naval Force. On the contrary, those are very poor people who are going to the sea in their own water, trying to abide by the rules, and the very illegitimate rules. The treaty with the authority in the past allowed 6 miles of fishing, and they go now. Israel is saying 3 miles. Even within 3 miles, there are attacked every week. There were severe attacks in Rafah last week. 6 boats were confiscated, adding to 100. Now the number has been 180 boats confiscated. When you say 180 boats confiscated, you're talking about 2 or 3 families per boat, which were destroyed completely. And 190 boats over the last 6 years were completely destroyed. I met people who lost loved ones because 13 fishermen were killed during the last 6 years as well. Again, for no reason, just a boat coming, shooting on them. The arrests are so humiliating. And the scenario of the arrest is unbelievable. They ordered them to strip, then jump in the water, in the cold water in the winter. It doesn't matter winter or summer, and swim for 200 meters while they're shooting around them for no reason. In a day or two, they are released, just as a policy of humiliation. These crimes must be documented and must be remembered by the world. Again, the other sector, which is bigger than the fishing industry, or the fishing industry, is the second biggest in the Gaza Strip. The biggest one is farming. Again, farmers on the eastern border with the pre-1948 Palestine are attacked every week as well. Only this morning, owners of beehives were attacked while they're taking the honey from the beehives. A very illegitimate, unexplained, unprovoked attacks. Only one word comes to my mind: humiliation, and trying to make the Palestinians always feel inferior. And that adds to the policy of the racist state of Israel, which we shouldn't be avoiding talking about, and we should be pushing to the forefront. This is a country which doesn't deserve to be respected, treated as a democratic country. Its army treated as the only ethical army in the Middle East. This is a country which commits crimes against the Palestinians every week, every day, and it's ongoing under the world's eyes. And the hypocrisy of the Western governments, including our terrible, terrible government, is unbelievable. The collusion is unbelievable. The arms factories all over Britain is one example. The trade, the intention not to impose any sanctions on Israel, on the contrary, to protect Israel in the international community, is unbelievable. And to be honest, it's indirect or maybe direct collusion with the Israelis in committing these crimes against the Palestinians. Israel is pushing the Gaza Strip to a situation that they declared so many times that we give them whatever makes them live, not die, just enough for them to live. So we will give them, we will even count the calories, as they said, and they are doing it. They, as I said, poverty is everywhere. But there is another thing which is I want to warn against for activists in the Gaza Strip. The Zionists now are using a lot of photos from main streets, high streets in Gaza, in different towns in the Gaza Strip, because in any conflict there are the capital, the businessmen who benefit from the conflict. and those are flourishing, although the population is, as I said, on the line of poverty. There is a small section which is opening very posh resources, restaurants, hotels, boutiques, whatever, and the Zionists take those photos and say, here is Gaza. Why are you so concerned about Gaza? Here's Gaza. That is not Gaza. Gaza is for people to go and see the real life of people beyond these high streets and beyond these posh areas which don't represent a big percentage of the Palestinian population. And of course, the issue in Gaza is, again, is the water pollution. And as you know, any sewage treatment facility needs at least 14 hours of continuous electricity for this sewage treatment to function properly. And Gaza never had this in 16 years. So most of the sewage is partially treated, some of it is untreated, and the Gazans in big areas on the Mediterranean Sea have no other alternative but to dump the polluted water, sewage or partially polluted, partially treated into the Mediterranean Sea. And this is a real environmental tragedy which must be brought to the forefront, because environmentalists should care about that. This is the Mediterranean Sea, and it will affect other areas as well. The Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are very defiant, like the Palestinians everywhere, despite all this. I don't think that the Israeli policies will create anything else but more defiance among the Palestinians. And people have reached a state of despair that they say, to hell with it, we are dying anyway, so let's die. If they attack us, we're going to die resisting them. So we must not shy away from supporting the Palestinian resistance anywhere in Palestine, because again, the gigantic propaganda machine of the Israelis and their supporters in Britain and elsewhere, they are ready to portray any Palestinian act as an act of terror, when we should really, as activists, be standing firm and saying whatever the Palestinians do, it's as a result of the Israeli aggression. And there is no doubt about this, but sadly, the spin machines in the West and everywhere are working against this. Our narrative should be going back to the basic roots, the roots of the fact that the Palestinians were ethnically cleansed. The Palestinians are still suffering after 73 years. The ethnic cleansing is still ongoing, and the state of Israel we should push for the state of Israel to be treated as a pariah state and have no wishy-washy approach to any policies that will compromise this. We are fighting for justice away from rhetoric, and it's part of our pride that we are Palestinians that are in the forefront of fighting this Zionist racist ideology on behalf of the world, because we are not only fighting for Palestine, we're fighting against all attempts of exploitation in the area and beyond, which is Zionism is part of it. I thank you very much for inviting me, and I will leave the stage to other people to speak. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Michelle. I hope you'll be able to stay with us. But thank you for really painting that picture of just how dire the situation in Gaza and the utter despair that people are being forced to live in. Also, at the same time, highlighting the resistance of the Palestinian people faced with the situation that they're under. And next, we're going to be hearing from Oder Zachariah, who will be speaking to us from Jerusalem. Oder is involved in the Sheikh Jarrah campaign. And so, Oder, we'd like to welcome you to the meeting.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to invite me to speak about the situation in Jerusalem. In fact, I'm going to speak about Jerusalem, not because all this Israeli policies is going on in Jerusalem, but because Jerusalem is really a good example for the Israeli colonial settler apartheid regime. You know, it's important to talk as well to mention that the problem in Jerusalem hasn't really started not just today or last year or this year, where we have been witnessing, as our friend talked about, there is a systematic attacks against the holy places, against the prayers who go to the mosque. But it's very important to look at the bigger picture, at the comprehensive situation. I mean, we talk about Sheikh Jarrah, but it's not only Sheikh Jarrah which is really being targeted by the Israelis. There are many neighborhoods. There is Sheikh Jarrah, there is Al Bustan in Silwan, Batn al Hawa in Silwan, Wadi Halwa in Silwan, there is Al Asawiya, there is Jabal al Mukabbir. So it's very important that we look at the bigger picture of what's going on in Jerusalem, which reflects the Israeli colonial settler apartheid policy. It's as well important to say that the problem started not just today. I mean, we say it's the Nakba, it's now the anniversary, but as we said, as well you said that the Nakba which is going on is not started only in 1948, even it started as a result of the Balfour Declaration in 1917, even before that. And we're talking about nearly more than 100 years now of a colonial settler apartheid regime during the British mandate after the establishment of the Israeli colonial regime in 1948, which led to the division, as we know, to divide Jerusalem. West Jerusalem became under the Israeli authority, and East Jerusalem with the West Bank under Jordan. And we know that even this, during 1948, nearly 80,000 Palestinians were depopulated and were forced to leave West Jerusalem to East Jerusalem, and nearly 38 villages out of 48 were completely destroyed and depopulated in Jerusalem. Of course, as you know, in 1967, Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, where all Jerusalem became under the Israeli rule or Israeli colonial regime. You know, in 1967, the first thing Israel has done, which has been the basis for all what's going on in Jerusalem, Israel annexed East Jerusalem. What does that mean? It put East Jerusalem under the Israeli jurisdiction, and it took several decisions. One, expanding the border of Jerusalem and expanding the border of the municipality of West Jerusalem to East Jerusalem, which was institutionalized in 1980 by the Israeli Knesset, the so-called Israeli Parliament, where they declared that East Jerusalem, that East and West Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel. So the annexation has been the legal background or the legal concept that Israel has established in 1948 and then expanded to 1967. You know, Israel has been since then implementing various policies which lead to the control of more land. Its goal or aim to control more land and to displace or force the displacement of the Palestinian people from the city of Jerusalem. I think all of us, maybe we know now, it's important to mention, now Israel is controlling and using 87% of all the land of Jerusalem for confiscating for building settlements. In East Jerusalem, there are nearly 215 Jewish Israeli settlers who they live in 15 settlements in occupied East Jerusalem. During the last years, Jerusalem has witnessed an expansion, a huge increase and escalation of the Israeli policies, of the Israeli crimes. One of them is really settlement expansion. You know, during 2020 and 21, there has been several settlement projects in Jerusalem. One of them the building of Hamatos settlement in the south of East Jerusalem in Beit Safafa land, Givat Hamatos. As well, they approved the building of E1. E1 is in the east of Jerusalem, of the city of Jerusalem, and they approved the construction of Atarot settlement. It is in the north of Jerusalem on the land what used to be the port of Jerusalem. It is a settlement of 9,000 housing units for the Orthodox Jews. So the strategy which has been going on all the time, and it has been increased during the last few years, is to surround the city of Jerusalem with settlement, to isolate the city of Jerusalem from its expansion in the south, Bethlehem and Hebron, in the east, the Jordan Valley and Jericho, and in the north, Ramallah, Nablus, and the West Bank. So the strategy to isolate Jerusalem and as well to expand the settlement that are in the city of Jerusalem, to separate the neighborhood of the city of Jerusalem from each others, and to make it like small ghettos, no continuity, no connection between each others. You know, we have been during 2001 and 2020, 2021, we have seen really a huge escalation on the expansion of settlement. We know why that, mainly as well because of the previous American administration, the Trump administration. They have been encouraging all these policies, you know, by declaring, you know, what Trump has done. They declare that Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel. They moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and as well they stopped funding UNRWA, and they stopped funding hospitals that are in East Jerusalem. So all these policy by the previous American administration, it gave Israel a more green line. It encouraged the Israeli government to continue and to escalate all its policy of land control and building Israeli Jewish settlement. You know, now we're talking about controlling land, which is as well connected to the Israeli urban planning, discriminatory urban planning policy. You know, all the plans that Israel has been trying to put or to draft for Jerusalem always has one goal, is how to control more land and how to reduce the number of the Palestinians in the city, and how to increase the number of the Jewish Israeli settlers. You know, this is part of the big plan, which they talk, what they call it in the Israeli planning system. They call it the Greater Jerusalem. For them, a Greater Jerusalem, it doesn't include only the city of Jerusalem. Now they are planning to add the Gush Atzion block in Bethlehem to the city of Jerusalem, and Ma'ali Adumim and E1 in the east to the city, and Givat Ze'ev from the north to the city of Jerusalem. You know, and you know the plan that after constructing the separation wall, they made 3 neighborhoods, Palestinian Jerusalemite neighborhood, outside the wall or behind the separation wall. We're talking about nearly 140,000 Palestinian Jerusalemites. They live behind the wall. They want to add these settlements to the city and to separate the Palestinian neighborhood. So if they do that, you know, always in the mind of the Israeli leaders or the Israeli planners, what we call it, the demographic domination. And if they were always, they talk about a majority of Jewish Israelis vis-a-vis a minority of Palestinian Arab in the city of Jerusalem. So by doing this, and what they are working now on achieving what they call it Greater Jerusalem, they will be 80% of the population of Jerusalem Jewish Israeli settlers and 20% only Palestinian Arabs. While now, at the moment, maybe I'm thinking you know that the Palestinians represent nearly 41% of all the population of Jerusalem. And this is what they are trying to change. This is what they are trying to do through all these policies to reduce the number of the Palestinians and to increase the number of the Israeli Jewish settlers. You know, there has been as well during the last 2 years, several plans that Israel has put for the East Jerusalem. You know, one of them is what they call it East Jerusalem City Center, which prevent any social, economic development in the city for the Palestinian Arabs, and it will lead to the confiscation of 60% of the city center of Jerusalem, based on that they don't want to allow any changes in the city. The other plan is what we call it, they call it Wadi Silicon. You know, this is like the Wadi Silicon project in San Francisco, which is the plan to destroy the industrial area in Wadi Joz. It's a big area in order to build a high-tech compound in this area. So the third plan as well is to build four-star hotels in front of Damascus Gate outside the old city to control the whole area. You know, another plan or another policy now they are doing what they call it land entitlement and land settlement in East Jerusalem. You know, since 1967, the Israeli government has frozen any land registration in occupied East Jerusalem. In 2018, the Minister of Justice, Shakid, she decided that we are going to start registration of land in East Jerusalem. You know what does that mean? It means the implementation of the absentee property law. You know, according to this law, which was put in 1950, a lot of the land, most of the land in Palestine in 48 was confiscated according to the absentee property law. So that's what they are starting to do. And if they do that, they will control or confiscate most of what's left in occupied East Jerusalem. You know, all these policies as well is connected to the restriction of building. There are a lot of restriction on building for the Palestinian Arabs. You know, it's very complicated to get a permit for building. You know, sometimes it takes 5 years, 10 years to get a license. Not only that, it costs a lot of money. Just to mention an example, to get a permit to build a house of 100 square meters, the family has to pay nearly around $40,000 US just to get the permission. So because of that, a lot of people, they built without a permission. You know, these days, there are nearly 20,000 homes or houses that are built without permission. What does that mean? These houses are under the risk of demolition. You know, every day, there are homes that are demolished by the municipality of Jerusalem, by the Interior Ministry of Israel, you know, under the pretext that it was built without permission. Just to mention, only in 2021, 178 structure was demolished. In 2020, 170 homes were destroyed completely and 391 people were displaced. So home demolition is another tool that the Israeli occupation is using in order to force the people to leave the city, in order to change the character of the city, to Judaize the city, to become a Jewish Israeli city rather than a Palestinian Arab city. Of course, this is in addition to targeting either by eviction or demolition of many neighborhoods like Sheikh Jarrah. You know, we have Sheikh Jarrah East. We are talking about nearly 55 families. We have Sheikh Jarrah West that under eviction. We have Silwan, in Silwan, 6 neighborhoods that are facing either evictions or demolition. The same in Isawiya and all the different neighborhoods. So in addition to that, denying the residency for the Palestinians in Jerusalem. You know, there are a lot of restrictions that the Ministry of Interior are imposing on Palestinian right to access and live in the city of Jerusalem. It's very complicated. They have been really revoking the Palestinian residency. Nearly now, today, nearly 15,000 Palestinians in East Jerusalem, they lost their right to live in the city of Jerusalem by revoking their residency. The last thing is really, it's not, the Israelis are not really only controlling land and restricting the Palestinian right to building or housing, but as well, they are targeting the Palestinian national identity. They have been targeting the education system in East Jerusalem. They are trying to impose the Israeli education system on the Palestinian schools in East Jerusalem. At the same time, they have been preventing the building of schools, and because of that, there is a shortage of schools for Palestinians in the city of Jerusalem. The same like they're changing the names of the road, the names of the neighborhood. They are trying to impose the Israeli curriculum, part of Judaization, the narrative, controlling the narrative, the history of the Palestinians, like a Nakba and other history of the Palestinians. So just to conclude, what we are facing really in Jerusalem, which is an example for all the Israeli policy in all parts of Palestine, not only on Jerusalem, but that's what's happening in 1948 against the Palestinian Arab who are living inside, that we are facing a colonial settler apartheid regime. They are trying to displace the people, and at the same time, they are discriminating in all levels, in all aspects of life against the Palestinian people in East Jerusalem. So your work is very important. Your voice is very important. Your support is very important, especially the British government is one of the first responsible for these crimes, for this misery, for this problem that our people is facing in Palestine. Thank you, and I'm sorry for being long.
Thank you. Thank you, Zakaria, pointing out the situation in Jerusalem and the huge expansion of Jewish settlements backed by the US, and at the same time, the demolition of Palestinian homes. So next we have joining us is Dr. Ahmed from the Muslim Association of Britain, and he will speak to us about the Abrahamic Accords. Welcome, Dr. Ahmed.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Good afternoon and Eid Mubarak and happy Eid for everyone. I know this is a Eid celebration organized by the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign and others. With this occasion, I'm the president of the Birmingham branch of the Muslim Association of Britain. And as you know, we are part of a coalition that supports the Palestinian cause across the board, really. So we have been demonstrating, issuing statements, especially during those critical times in Ramadan. That's for the second year successively that we see those settlers going into the Aqsa Mosque and all those brutal acts that we have seen on social media, on TV. On behalf of the Muslim Association of Britain and our friends in the coalition, Friends of Al-Aqsa, Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, Stop the War Coalition, and the Palestinian Forum in Britain, and all other organizations, actually free people across the globe, we send a clear message that we support our brothers and sisters in Palestine. I'm now really in a park. We have a social gathering for Eid, and while we enjoy our being, so having social gathering, we enjoy that we are celebrating Eid. We never forget our brothers and sisters who are in the Aqsa Mosque and Jerusalem and the whole Palestine, in Gaza, under the siege. So we always remember them, and we continue to support them. We've been actually even during Ramadan on the 22nd of April. We send a bus from Birmingham to London to join the protest to support Al-Aqsa, and we know that for the occasion of the Nakba. So we'll never forget all those stations, and we've seen young people, new generations, generation after generation. They're not born during the time of Nakba, but they take the flag of the Palestine, they take the flag of truth, actually, flag of Haqq, because we know this is an occupation, a brutal occupation, apartheid voice in Britain here in the West is a shadow to try to support our brother and sister over there in Palestine. And we've been issuing, as I said, statements, putting pressure and lobbying to the British government, asking them to take the responsibility. And we've seen a lot of activities in terms of the boycotting all those who have relations with the Zionist regime. So we continue to do that. We'll continue to work with our friends in this coalition. And I send a clear message from here on behalf of the Muslim Association of Britain that we'll continue to do that. We support our brothers and sisters in Palestine, those meetings and those occasions, and to get those valuable guests that I heard giving us the message and the picture how the situation looks like. So we'll tell them, you are in you are in Palestine, and we are echoing what you're doing, and we support you, and we'll continue to do so. So I've sent you Eid greetings, and at the same time, again, you a very strong support message in your cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for your message of support and solidarity. Next, we're joined by Camille. Camille is the chair of PSC and will brief us on recent developments in Palestine.
Thank you very much. Naeem, if I stand, will I be in camera or not? I'm going to stand. If you can see me. Yeah.
No, you'll be all right.
I'll be all right. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for coming, and Eid Mubarak. I just wanted to add about other areas in Palestine quickly before moving on to the UK. So we heard about Gaza, Jerusalem, but in the West Bank, at the moment, Jenin is under attack, which is a very important city, because two people originally from a village called, basically it's called Pomegranate. It's actually Rumman, that's the name of the village. The two guys from there carried out an operation a few days ago. They were closed this morning, and the Israeli troops are in tens of vehicles. They'll be arresting lots of people, interrogating lots of people. So that's just, although it's a daily occurrence that they do that, at the moment the focus is very much on Jenin, because actually a number of the people who carried out operations inside the Green Line came from there. Another area that's important to mention is called Masafa Yatta, which is south of Hebron, because the Israeli court, which has no jurisdiction over Palestinian areas, has declared that villages in Masafa Yatta can be depopulated so that the Israeli army can have exercises. Okay, 1,000 people from villages there the decision was made at the end of last week, and so they're under threat. They've lived in these homes all their lives, and suddenly the Israeli court, which has no jurisdiction, because this is south of Hebron, which is in the occupied Palestinian areas, they've been told, we've given the army permission to take your homes. That's how they treat the Palestinian people, as subhuman. Because can you imagine if any country, if here in the UK decided that, oh, we're going to go to Leicester, we're not going to allow Indian people to live there, or we're going to demolish their home. This is the picking of what they do. Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, and Amnesty International, and before them, an important report came out from the UN through an agency called ESQA, which said Israel is carries out apartheid policies, but particularly, and this is important as a Palestinian here, against the Palestinians everywhere. As an example, my mother lives with me here in Birmingham. We're both from Jerusalem. She is not allowed to go and live in Jerusalem, but any Jewish lady in Birmingham can get on a plane, go to Palestine, because they can go to the settlements, not just to what is Israel. They can go and have a life. But my mother can't go back. So that's the sort of, so they declared Israel as practicing the crime of apartheid and oppressing the Palestinian people as a whole. So I've said all of that just to add to what my colleagues, and thank them very much, both Mushir and Zakaria, who are great friends, for what they said. I understand Zakaria always reminds me, he was one of the people who initially started up the Palestine Solidarity Campaign in the UK. So he goes back a long way in terms of his own contribution. But I wanted to bring the focus to the UK. So we have 3 reports which say Israel practices apartheid. From 3 independent reports, painstakingly done professionally from a research point of view, which came to that conclusion. So you might ask the question, what does the political class in the UK think of these reports? And particularly the government, but also the opposition. The government is with Israel all the way, full stop. Israel can do anything. And I mean anything, I'm not exaggerating. It can do anything, and the UK will say nothing. It will laud it as an ally. It would say it shares the same values with Israel that Israel has. And I mean, you've heard, what values? Really, genuinely, what values are we talking about that the UK shares? Democracy? Is Israel a democracy? No. It's a pretense democracy, because it gives the right to vote to some Palestinians who carry Israeli citizenship, allows them to go into the Knesset, but it knows they will never have any impact. So all the rights are with the Jewish Israelis and so on. So the government is not a lost cause because we keep pressuring. But what about the Labour Party?
Probably worse.
So what is their explanation or their reaction to the charge of apartheid against Israel? Anyone like to have a guess?
Keir Starmer said it's not.
But explanation, not a statement, an explanation. Okay. What they told us, this is the shadow Foreign Office team, is we can't disagree with any of the analysis, but we don't think it's helpful to call it apartheid. Why? Because how can we then speak to the Israelis and bring them on board to try? Do you see the false logic?
Yeah.
That the only thing you can do with the Israelis is not upset them, because they might come and talk to you and say, yeah, we think what we're doing is wrong. The only thing that will work
like 1938 appeasement.
is pressure. Let's not talk about appeasement or any other thing. Let's talk about the UK.
Yeah.
Okay, focus on the UK. If you put no pressure on Israel, it will continue to do what it does. If you grow trade with Israel, it will feel emboldened. If you follow, and I do, the UK Embassy in Tel Aviv Twitter account and the consulate in East Jerusalem account, what do you see? As far as the embassy in Tel Aviv, the Palestinian issue is not an issue. You will not find a single tweet in which it condemns Israel for something it's done in the occupied territories. Never mind East Jerusalem, none of it. Go to the consulate, Twitter account. We heard from Zakaria about Sheikh Jarrah. The consulate is in Sheikh Jarrah. In Sheikh Jarrah, it sits proudly on top of a hill, looks down on where the Palestinians are going to be ethnically cleansed at some point. Make no mistake about this, they're still going for it. So what does the consulate or the consul general do? She goes and has her pictures taken with the residents of Sheikh Jarrah and says that depopulating that area would not be harmful to peace. And she goes with the EU representatives. And here's something for us who experienced Brexit. In the past, if the EU representatives went to say, E1 to say we're against the ethnic cleansing of E1, they would go and say the EU delegation went. Now, listen to this. When the EU tweets about this, they say, EU representatives and like-minded states, meaning Britain, because we're not in the EU anymore. So become a like-minded state. So that's what Boris has brought us. The status that we have is we're a like-minded state in this particular situation. I say all of this just to paint a picture that in the UK, one, the government is completely with Israel and is complicit in the crimes against the Palestinians. It is complicit because it sells arms to Israel. It doesn't stop it building settlements. It doesn't in the UN, push for an end to this. It's complicit and it grows trade. At the moment, the UK is formulating the trade treaty agreement with Israel following Britain's exit from the EU, again, Brexit. So what did it do? Does anyone know what the government did on the way to signing this new agreement? What it did was the following. It started a survey. What does the survey say? What hurdles do we need to overcome so we can grow trade with Israel? So people could write in and say, well, I've been trying to do business with, and this is the problem I face. Oh, we'll get rid of that because we want to grow trade with Israel. No talk about human rights. No talk about we'll only grow trade if none of that. And I think it's Jacob what's her name? I remember her name. He has a hand in it. Of course, Jacob does. But so the point is the UK, in terms of the government, grows trade with Israel. It effectively excuses what it does. And nothing was starker than the position of the current foreign secretary vis-a-vis Russia and the Ukraine and Palestine and Israel. If you take any tweet, almost, I exaggerate a little bit, I have to. If you take any tweet that the foreign secretary does in which she mentions something about Russia and the Ukraine and what the UK is doing, you can easily substitute the need for what she does, substitute Palestine instead of the Ukraine and Russia instead of Israel. Regardless of what you think of the war, that's an individual thing. Okay, the Palestinian people stand with the Ukrainian people because they are facing, displacement in millions, which if you go back to 1948 is probably the equivalent in terms of the numbers that have been explained. But you can easily substitute Ukraine for Palestine. And when she proudly says Russia will fail, Putin will fail, she should be saying Israel will fail in what it does against the Palestinian people, because it's inhuman. It is a set of war crimes. It is a theft of a people's homeland. It is just undoubtedly, that is what's happened. My understanding is, I don't know the current count, but 6,000 individual pieces of sanctions have been applied against Russia. How many have been applied against Israel?
0.
Thank you. 6,000 after a few days. 0 after 74 years. So we know the government is not suddenly going to say, you know what, my God, thank you, Amnesty. Now we understand it. They know. They know. And as for Keir Starmer and Labour, Okay, Sakia, you're a lawyer. Do you disagree with the evidence? And have you carried out your own study? So don't say we don't accept that Israel is an apartheid state. It bloomin' is, unless you can prove otherwise. Because you can't have three highly respected organizations who are now reporting on crimes in the Ukraine. You accept it when it's the Ukraine, but not when it's Palestine? That's hypocrisy. That's double standards. And that is what angers the Palestinian people and their supporters. I speak both as a Palestinian and a supporter because I'm in the Palestine Solidarity campaign. Why is it that the UK in particular, and we heard about the Balfour Declaration, we don't need to go back that long. But last year, when Israel was desecrating the Aqsa Mosque, when it was attacking peaceful worshippers, when it was working to ethnically cleanse Sheikh Jarrah, why is it the UK said nothing until the first rocket came out of Gaza? Until. And then, we stand with Israel's right to self-defense. It's an occupying, apartheid, settler, colonialist, criminal state. How can you stand with it when the evidence is that nobody can say, we didn't know about this? They know. They absolutely know. And so what we can do here is, first of all, and this is really important in the context of demonstration next week. Look, last year, hundreds of thousands of people went out during a couple of weeks. 3 demonstrations in London, started with a couple of thousand outside Downing Street, organized almost ad hoc by a couple of groups, then to the coalition that Ahmed described, which has continued and is organizing next Saturdays. The point about the London demonstration are the visuals. Okay? When people saw the 200,000 people marching, that gave the Palestinians some hope. Now, next week, I would love to say we're going to get 200,000, but all I would say is, as many of you as you can, please go. Encourage friends and relatives in London to go, because again, it is the visuals with that. It is actually saying, we haven't forgotten you. Yes, it's about the Nakba, but we can't have a country that continues to sell weapons to an apartheid, settler colonialist, occupying criminal terrorist state. At the very least, that must end. Because I remember when Richard Burden, who used to be my MP in Northfield, who unfortunately lost his seat at the last election, asked the then Foreign Minister here, Alistair Burt, can he guarantee that no British weapons were used against the people protesting at the fence with Gaza? No, he couldn't. Why is that? Because when a company wants to sell weapons somewhere from the UK, they have to get a license. And so the idea is that they have to carry out, the government does a risk assessment on the country. Need I continue? Is there any risk Israel will use the weapons against the Palestinians?
No.
I rest my case. So if that is the case, why do you allow the weapons to be sold? Or you update your risk assessment based on knowledge. There was a picture of the then ambassador to Israel standing at the fence with the Israeli military. Yeah, when they were using sniper rifles to kill Palestinians. David Quarry, his name was. Yeah, so they should be updating at the very least. Let's work in a sort of a systematic way. You say that you've done a risk assessment in the past, you need to update it. I teach risk assessment, by the way, in terms of, so you don't leave it from 20 years ago as it is. You say, what, is there any chance they could use any of our weapons? But when you sell Israel sniper rifles, is there a risk they could be used at the Gaza fence? Or do they go, oh gosh, we'll use the American one, not the British one? Seriously, I mean, honestly, it's that bizarre. that this is the kind of policy that we have in the UK, which is completely wrong. I'll finish on the issue of what we call shrinking space, because I think that's really important. So these are attempts to silence us all, not to hold this meeting, for the venue to be attacked, to say you're hosting an anti-Semitic meeting, etc., etc. We won't have it. We'll continue to speak up. We'll continue to organize meetings, marches. Whether Priti Patel says we're allowed or not is something we will deal with if we have to, because we have to continue to speak up for the Palestinian people. The last thing, or the next thing you will hear in the Queen's speech, is it next week? It's not too far ahead, is this new law they want to introduce, which effectively tries to ban the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement in the UK. Now, are they doing it for any country other than Israel, do you think? No, they have not done it before. Why are they doing it now? It's because they want to protect Israel and shield it from accountability. We will do our best. We've got a coalition, Palestine Solidarity Campaign, with many organizations which are not only campaigning on Palestine, but because they recognize the danger of the government dictating what can and can't be done in the way in terms of protest. So we're working on that, but you will hear the start of it. We are sure it's going to be in the Queen's speech when it comes, but we're working as hard as we can to oppose it. Of course, the government has a high majority, they could pass it. What is more shameful is if the Labour Party supports it or abstains. Neither are acceptable. Neither are acceptable. So, and Anthea, please continue to support the Palestinian people, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Join us. I'm sure Naeem will point you in the right direction if you're not a member, because the larger the number of members we have, the more clout we can have going to speak to government, speak to other people to say, we represent X thousand people, which is a lot of people. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Camille. As you said, we know too well the complicity of this country in Israel's apartheid, and also war crimes against the Palestinians. But also, we know its duplicity, so we see how quickly it's brought sanctions against Russia, and talk about the right of Ukrainians to self-defense, but then deny the Palestinians the right to set their self-defense. So now we're going to open the floor to questions. So I think we've still got the speakers.
I think if we can address the first couple of questions to Carmel, because it's got to go to.
Okay. So if anyone's got any questions for Carmel. Janet.
Camel, have you got any Palestinian students more recently? Because we've had a load come to our store.
Oh, at the universities, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I mean, to be fair to a previous Consul General, Vincent Field, when he finished, or as he was finishing being Consul General, he initiated a scholarship for Palestinians to come to the UK, and for PhDs, for example. Not tens of them, but also set up, I think it's called HASPAL, which is an initiative to support where a university pays half the cost or something of a student coming, and that the rest is paid by someone else. They continue to come from the West Bank, but it's more difficult from Gaza, as you can imagine. So yeah, there'll be more are trying to come out. And of course, the question then is, particularly in Gaza, and Mushir, I'm sure, can allude to this, is even if they come and they do a degree, you want them to go back and work there, but what job opportunities are there? Taxi drivers, shop, or, it's very difficult to, apart from the poverty and so on. There are some fantastic Palestinians who have studied and are in a very good position to contribute to society, to contribute to Palestine when it's free. They're not allowed.
Thank you, Stuart.
Yeah, I thought it was a very interesting set of comments on the Labour Party in particular, and just a couple of points on that, questions on that. I don't know if you're aware that the Labour Party always produces a record of its conference, and suddenly, quite recently, Wednesday, the conference disappeared. Why? Because the conference took a position saying Israel is an apartheid state, but in the sense of their own organisation. A very useful point about abstaining, the police bill which restricts rights to demonstrate, was having great difficulty at the House of Lords. In the end, the Labour Party ordered its MPs to abstain, and the thing was passed by 200 votes to 115. So the 150 Labour MPs actually voted it down. And just lastly, I don't know if people have seen the Labour Party has involved in Barnet members, leading members of the Israeli party, the canvas.
Yep.
That's how rolling they are.
That was, I mean, they would never do it with any other country. You wouldn't see Mexicans coming to Mexican Labour Party coming to campaign in. And it's interesting. Why did they bring them? Because it has a large Jewish population. Now, why conflate Israel with Jews? Because that's what it does. Not all Jews identify with Israel, not all Jews support Israel, and certainly a lot of them think that it should be held accountable for what it does. So it is what the Labour Party there did was wrong, and Keir Starmer dismissing apartheid is wrong. I was there at the Labour Party conference when the motion was passed, and the shenanigans were just absolutely shameful. That a democratically passed motion should be really at the heart of policy on Palestine, but because apparently we didn't start by saying Israel has a right to exist, okay? You don't determine what people say in a motion. If it's passed by your conference, you implement it. That's the normal, isn't that democracy? Otherwise, where does the Labour Party get its policies from? Why have a conference? And of course, they changed the rules to make these things more difficult in the future, including electing the leader and what have you. You think one of the explanations we hear from people like Keir Starmer and from Robert Jenrick, who is the former Conservative Secretary of State, is they have connections with Israel. So what? You do what's right. That's what you do. You stand for humanity, for international law, and for morals and our values, apparently. I'm sorry I have to go, but thank you very much indeed for having me.
So we still have the speakers joining us remotely. So is there any more questions? Jazz?
Can anyone comment on what the Palestinian authorities are saying or doing?
Should we take some more questions? Stuart?
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to make that brief. Some very important points were made about Palestinian children's education. And I've got an amazing article which I'll give people, which you cannot say is a leftist or pro-Palestinian. It's written by Jonathan Friedman, a very powerful supporter of Israel, in the Jewish Chronicle, no less, which is the pinnacle of British Zionism. And he went to a village, and the children got 460 shekels a year from the Palestinian village, and 1,600 in the Jewish village. Now that is a bigger differential. Some people in the NET did the investigation. That is a bigger differential than between black and white children in part of South Africa. So and it goes on about inequality of spending on transport, etc. Just the other point I was just going to make, that we've got some leaflets on the Elbit protests on the stall over there, which is continuing, but there's some leaflets about some of the work on there, people see at the end. And just saying, Stop the War is very keen to support this protest, and we will be mobilising our supporters down on Saturday, and we urge people to join the coach at the 8 o'clock at the Central Mosque.
Thank you, Stuart. Do we have any more questions for the speakers? No, so I think we've got a question about what the Palestinian. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Takir.
Yeah, just a question about kind of we know the importance of unity in life anyway. We know the challenges that the Palestinians face in unity. But how important do you think it is for the Palestinian civil society kind of come together when when you have this unity amongst amongst Hamas and Fatah, and so that's my question.
Thank you. Does anybody want to answer those questions?
Yes.
So the first one is, what are the Palestinian authorities doing?
Would you like to answer it?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Mushir.
Okay, sorry. The question is about the Palestinian Authority and what can the Palestinian Authority do? Is that the question?
Yes.
Well, the Palestinian Authority can do one thing in my view: stand by the Palestinian people, and that's not happening at the moment at all. I mean, the Palestinians through the Palestinian Authority have given all the concessions that can be made to the Israelis, and yet the Israelis are giving nothing back to the Palestinian Authority. So the Palestinian Authority can say two things. First of all, I will stop the security arrangements with the Israelis, and that is a very, very good card they can play, but I don't know why they're not doing it. As long as you're killing the Palestinians, as long as you committing crimes, we haven't mentioned Beta, for instance, and what's happening in Beta village near Nablus. And again, the ethnic cleansing, and they're trying to take lands from the people of Beta, the attacks in Burqa, the attacks in Jenin, everywhere, Jordan Valley, I mean, wherever. If you continue to attack our people, if you continue to storm our towns, which happens, we don't want to have any arrangements with you, and they're not doing it. So we're really not standing with the Palestinian people. And secondly, the Palestinian Authority should really think deeply of changing the course of their demands. You know, the two-state solution have really failed, and it has failed. And obviously it's failing. There is a gap in more land, and Palestinians are getting nothing. They're shrinking into more and more smaller areas. So the Palestinian Authority should say, and that is something that the Palestinians are now realizing in bigger numbers. It's not yet the majority of the Palestinians, but people are realizing that the only solution for the problem of Palestine is to have one state for all. And this will be a massive, massive challenge to the Zionist project. And this will be rejected completely by the racist Zionist project. And that's not rhetoric. And that will give us credibility in front of the world. And that will represent the biggest danger to the Zionist project. But the authority has mentioned it once or twice before, but they never really pursued it. So I think those two things, we don't want one two-state solution anymore. And second, but first, and very important, to stop the security arrangements with Israel. And obviously, the third thing is to think seriously of solving the division problem between Hamas and Fatah. But that's really difficult because it's two projects that are completely different. And sadly, I can say with confidence that the Palestinian masses, or street, if you like, are growing in opposing the authority and what it represents. What we saw over the last 2-3 weeks is total silence. A shy statement here and there by a Palestinian Authority official about what's happening in Jerusalem, but not a strong stand and a threat. For instance, if you continue to attack people of Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and provoke religious war, which we don't want. We don't want religious war. Then we will stop the security arrangements. They're not doing that. They can do a lot of things, but they're not doing it. And they are losing popularity, they are losing status, and they're losing value among the Palestinians rapidly.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Zakaria, would you like to come in?
I mean, just to say one sentence that, I mean, the Palestinian Authority performance has been tied up by Oslo Agreement. You know, although we talk about Oslo Agreement, it's a peace agreement, but really, you know, now it's more than 27-8 years, but we see that Oslo hasn't really address the real causes of the roots of the conflict or the problem there. It's more or less really make our the Palestinian more tight, more restricted their reaction or their performance, and because of that, they are not really being able to do much or more than what they are doing. I mean, and that's all.
Thank you. And Zakaria, we have another question, which is, what is the sense of unity among civil society in Palestine?
And the civil society is really united, is very strong, and because it has been really very strong, especially we see the human rights organization, the legal institution, we saw that has been really targeted by the Israeli government. You know, we heard, I'm sure you heard about the 6 organizations that were designated as a terrorist organization. And it's important to say that the civil society, the NGOs in occupied Jerusalem has been really targeted. You know, since 2052, NGOs or institution has been closed down completely by the police, by the Israeli government. And there has been closing, temporary closure for some organization. They have been preventing activities. You know, for example, these days, we as a coalition for human rights, it's very complicated, it's very difficult to organize any conference or any public meeting in Jerusalem, because the police, the security, they don't allow the places, the hotels where they have the facilities to give or to allow any activities, even you know, to appreciate the teachers for their work in the schools is not being allowed. Many cultural, many folkloric activities even have been prevented by the Israeli police, by the Israeli government. So in spite that the civil society has been really very strong, has been working and supporting the Palestinians in all parts of Palestine and especially in occupied Jerusalem, but it has been really under the attack by the Israeli police and the Israeli government.
Thank you, Zakaria. Are there any more questions?
I'll make an announcement.
Yeah, Stuart, can I ask?
Yeah.
Especially to Zakaria, I mean, I think what are the civil societies in Palestine? Are they working together in different parts of Palestine, like, for example, the 1948 borders, the ones living in the West Bank, then Jerusalem and Gaza, and how are they able to operate with all the difficulties that the Israelis are putting in their way? And what do you think they expect us to do from here? And I think Bashir, I was talking to him before, he had some ideas of what we should actually be doing in Britain, especially once we're coming out of COVID. And maybe he should share some of those ideas with us.
With regard to, I mean, the civil society, there has been a good cooperation between the different sectors in the West Bank and as well in 1948 within the Green Line. Like, you know, we do a lot of cooperation and work, for example, with the Adala. Adala, it's a human and legal institution in Haifa. So there has been a good close cooperation and coordination between civil society in different parts of the Palestine, whether inside in 48, in Gaza or the West Bank. You know, as we said, there has been a lot of restriction, a lot of attacks against the civil society, because they know that the Israelis, the occupation authority, they know very well that the presence, the strong civil society is supporting and trying to strengthen and support the presence of the Palestinians. So that's why they have been really targeting the civil society. I mean, it's not only they are closing, they are preventing and restricting the work of the civil society and NGOs in general in occupied territories, but as well, we have been seeing that the international community is really subjecting to the pressure of the Israelis. You know, maybe you have been hearing like during the last few years that the European Union have been putting some conditions on funding, like the USAID condition, which we're putting all the time on NGOs, like they have been really putting a list of Palestinian groups or forces and consider them as terrorists, and they are requiring the civil society to sign this article. They call it Article 5, and they put condition on civil society in order to be funded, that they have to acknowledge that these political parties, Palestinian political parties, are a terrorist organization. And this is because of the strong pressure and the strong work of the Israeli foreign ministry, the Israeli government, the Israeli, the NGOs monitor, which all, I mean, it's all these institutions has been putting a lot of pressure on the international community, on the European, on the state, in order to prevent or to stop funding to be access to the Palestinian civil society. So your work is very important in order to expose these policies and to work and to put pressure on your government, on the European Union governments as well, in order to stop putting all these conditions.
Thank you. And I think there was a question from Cher about what we should be doing.
Yes. Thank you very much for the question. I mean, we should really, as well as what we do in Britain, continue to strengthen and emphasize what we're doing in Britain in terms of campaigning on the ground, enlightening the knowledge or widening the knowledge of the British public about Israeli crimes, which the public doesn't know much, sadly, about. But we should really have a strong link with grassroots organizations in Palestine. And this is really important. For instance, I mentioned the fishermen. And as I said, what I saw was shocking even to me, beyond shocking. And for instance, in Birmingham, is there any chance of like linking up through a union or whatever with the fishermen activists on the ground, just to get their information, to support what they're doing, to highlight their suffering, to expose the crimes? This is really important. I mean, we in Sheffield have a lot of grassroots links with organizations in the Gaza Strip. And for instance, now we are working on a film about the fishermen, short film which will show the suffering of those people, which is, as I said, a real crime by the Israeli naval force, but nobody has tackled it in details and touching on the human side to it. The same thing with farmers. Can we link up between unions here and the Union of Farmers, or farmers on the ground? Not really the union, farmers on the ground. There are now cooperatives. There are so many good projects. There are 4 women in the east part of my town, Khan Yunis, on the border, in the village of Khuzaa. They have started their own cooperative with support from an NGO, and they are actually doing well and supporting their families. They took 1 acre of land and they planted it for 4 young women. Stuff like that is really important. How to link up. For instance, we made a film about the journalists, and we made it in cooperation with the National Union of Journalists in South Yorkshire. This is really symbolic, because when the National Union of Journalists fight to support a film like that is a real symbolic victory. Can we do that in Birmingham? Have a link with the fishermen, have a link with the farmers. And I would like to mention here that I made 2 films during my visit, finished 2 films during my visit to Gaza. One is called Shooting the Messenger, about the suffering of the journalists when they cover attacks on Gaza. And the second one is called Al-Araqib, a story of ethnic cleansing, about the cleansing of the village of Al-Araqib in the north of Beir Saba inside P1948. I would be very happy if we can show them in Birmingham at some stage. And this is really important, because the first film talks about what happened to the journalists through their own voices. 5 journalists, men and women, they're talking about their suffering. And the second one is an interview with Sheikh Sayyah al-Turi, who was the symbol of resistance of the destruction of the village of Al-Araqib and the neighboring area. So if Birmingham can organize something, It's really, really important because those films, we are showing them in Sheffield, in Nakba, and in Manchester as well. It's good to show them in Birmingham at some stage in the future. But as I said, link with grassroots is very, very important. The picture becomes so different. I'm an activist, and I didn't think of the fishermen. When I visited them, just by sheer coincidence, completely, I'm on board now campaigning for them because I saw the suffering. So that's what I'm saying. You need to establish link with people in the Gaza Strip, in East Jerusalem, in the West Bank, even in anywhere in the world. Palestinians inside camps in Lebanon, the horrific conditions of the Palestinians over there. But when you establish this grassroots link, as I said, campaigning become more momentous, you know. And I experienced it myself, and I really invite people to think about what I said about linking fishermen with people in Birmingham, or maybe you know fishermen in coastal areas. Maybe Birmingham is the landlocked area, but anything, the unions, this kind of work is really, really needed, as well as I said, sticking to our narrative, sticking to our strong stand for justice, and not diluting our demands because of pressure from the government or pressure from the media, which is trying to accuse us of anti-Semitism wherever we do for Palestine. We shrug these things on one side and continue stronger than before. These are the things I think we should do.
Thank you, Moshe. Just before I ask Naeem to talk to us about the demonstration and the next meeting, are there any more questions for the speakers? No?